I'm glad to be here. And this is mainly going to be an introduction to the Canadian Museum of Nature, which is the home of a relatively new collection that we call the National Biodiversity Cryobank of Canada. And here is our downtown building in Ottawa, Ontario. How many people have been inside this building before? Oh, that's actually quite good. That's great. Generally, we've had a bit of an inferiority complex because when people think about natural history museums in this country, they often talk about the wrong. So we're putting in a lot of effort to make sure that people know about us. This is a pretty beautiful building. It opened in 1911 and has apparently a ghost inside of it. But also, when the Parliament buildings burnt down in 1916, Parliament was moved to this building here. And actually in 1918, this is where women gained the right to vote in federal elections. So we also have another building, the Natural History Campus. And this is the home of the endangered taxonomist, which has been discussed, and is also the home to our collections, our natural history collections, which numbers now about 14.6 million specimens across the broad disciplines of zoology, botany, paleontology, and mineralogy. Now, if we forget about paleontology and mineralogy, because there's no DNA to be had there, we have some very old specimens in our collection, including some plants, one from 1766, collected by Joseph Banks up the coast of Labrador, and then specimens as well from the second Franklin expedition, the one that he survived. So this is a reminder, of course, of the colonial history of museum collections, but also shows you the depth of our collection. Okay, so we have over 200 years of biodiversity baseline data that shows changes over time and through space in species and communities. And really, it's a foundational resource for morphological taxonomy. So here is my colleague Bob Anderson, who is a weevil expert. This just goes to show you that really our collection methods haven't changed much. Can you hear me? Okay. Over the years. And these collection methods have really been meant to collect and preserve morphological specimens, morphological structures, and not so much genomic material. Until recently, this was our ability to collect more genomic material in the museum, 2 -80 freezers, which really served our internal purposes, mostly DNA and tissue samples. And so -80 freezers, this is a common sight in a lot of research centers, and they make me very nervous because if you have a power outage, you don't have much time to respond to that. So we knew that internally we had a real need to increase our proficiency at storing genomic material, but we were also aware of a biodiversity collection gap in this country, which was that there was no national genomic resource collection facility. So we decided to fill that gap, and we're lucky to find a donor who supported the establishment of this collection here, which is the National Biodiversity Cryobank of Canada, which opened in 2018. So just a little bit of information about this facility. We store samples at temperatures below -160 degrees Celsius in these freezers, and these are fusion freezers, and they provide very high temperature security. Okay? If you think of a conventional liquid nitrogen freezer, it is hooked by plumbing to a large tank of liquid nitrogen outside the building, and you have to effectively continuously refill that freezer. These instead have a 50-liter tank of liquid nitrogen in the middle of each freezer, And then on top is a cryocooler unit that continuously recondenses the nitrogen, making this effectively a lossless system of liquid nitrogen. And also meaning that if the electricity goes off, you have 50 liters of coolant that will kind of slowly evaporate, but you have 9 days of temperature security without any electrical input. So our collection capacity at the moment is 200,000 samples, and we can increase that by adding more freezers to our current footprint. Here you see our typical collection containers, and we have collection growth via internal and external contributions. In particular, internally, we have a large collection of Arctic plant tissue samples, and then externally, we've received about 8,000 samples from Parks Canada, and that's a partnership that we're continuing to pursue. And so just a quick reminder that this is work that we continue to do. This is my colleague Amanda Savoie, who's an Arctic seaweed researcher. And so when she collects her morphological specimens, she also takes fresh tissue in the field, which we desiccate in silica gel, and then that comes back to the Cryobank team. Okay? And often we do DNA sequencing, barcoding right away, and we also handle those data. So here's the kind of different components of a single collection event, including that genomic voucher. And we do publish our data to GBIF, as well as GGBN, which is the Global Genome Biodiversity Network, which is similar to GBIF, but is specifically for tissue samples and tissue collections. And then, of course, we publish our DNA sequence data as well. Now, eDNA archiving, this is a bit of a blank page, because currently we do not archive eDNA at the museum, but this is coming soon, and we have a couple of test cases to start soon. One is with Genfish. Matthew Yates has a bunch of tissue samples, eDNA samples, in the form of filters. What I understand is you guys cut them in half and you have some in backup. And so we're going to have that as a test case. And also I've been speaking with a researcher, Jackie Dawson, at the University of Ottawa, who's engaged in an Inuit-led project to look at the Arctic shipping risks in Inuit Nunavut. And they're going to be taking eDNA samples in duplicate, specifically with one set, going to be coming towards us. The value of eDNA archiving, I think, is clear to this group, and it's clear to us as well. It allows us to build large sample sets from multiple contributors. This gives us a time series of change of biodiversity. And then also, the future is unknown. We don't know what technology will exist to analyze these samples. And so this gives us an opportunity to look at these samples in the future. And this paper that I show here notes that it's really with centralized, persistent, and well-curated biobanks that we achieve these advantages. And this, I would say, is a good description of the museum and the cryobank. So we have many questions, and it's been helpful being here because a lot of these have started to be answered in my mind. And that is, what are the standard data fields that we should be using? The issue of sequence data management, legal and ethical considerations, especially in the context where eDNA samples often have human genetic signatures in them as well. And how do we encourage researcher buy-in? Finally, I'll just end with a few messages. One is the National Biodiversity Cryobank exists. We are open for sample contributions. Our loan program is active, and eDNA archiving will start soon. Thank you very much.